Hey class! Oh my gosh, this is our first lecture. I am so excited to begin all of this with you. Our 16-week adventure into this hybrid format of ecology. As you know, this is Karen Klein. I am your instructor, professor for the course, and this is the recorded version of your lecture. Um, I am at home, as you can hear. I have a cockatiel who is chirping and sitting on my head, which you can't see, but you'll hear him. I also have a parrot called an eclectus. He is a rescue. She is a rescue and she likes to scream. So that's just her. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Just wanted to clear that all up. Okay, so this is the first of two introductory lectures. This is part one, and we are in week one of the course. Now, you may be aware of what science is. Some of you are majoring in science. Some of you are not. You are English majors or maybe history majors. So this might be a review for you, or this may be new. So what is science? I mean, science is the field of study, or I should say an overarching term, when we look into how the world works. We form a research question, or we ask questions that we research, and we systematically look for the answer to those questions. We are involved in this field, which is it's fluid, it is ongoing. It's not a once and done type of field, which is why we say it's a body of knowledge and a process, because during lab we'll be doing a lot of that. We'll be doing a lot of investigating as far as how the natural world works. Science is cool. Science is exciting. It's really neat. Especially ecology. Thank you very much. I'm a little biased, but because there's just so much out in the world that we can explore and that we can discover. When you were a little kid, I'm sure that you were curious about everything and you tended to ask a lot of questions to your parents. Why does this work? Or your caregivers, how does that work? What is this? What is that? And hopefully you've still retained some of that curiosity. And so that is what's going to put the excitement into this course. And overall, it's what makes science exciting. I'm moving to a room with the cockatiel, but not with the eclectus, because I think she's going to keep screaming because I am talking. Now, obviously, science saves the day, right? It's useful. Science is a field that we can all, I hope we can all agree on, that it solves the world's problems, the big ones and the little ones, and it is critical as far as human existence. Why things happen, and trying to troubleshoot some of the unfortunate ills of the world, as we know that is what is going on today. Science is ongoing. Sure, we're always sciencing. We're always looking to find answers and collect data in order to actually disprove what may be the norm. And if the data shows that we were wrong as scientists, then we draw different conclusions. So we are always sciencing. And science is not something that is just limited to us in the classroom. It is not limited to the United States. It is actually something that we as humans partake in all over the world. Now, I also have a pug and a dog, and they've decided to join me, so you might hear a lot of snorting from the pug. I like that. All right. Now, the scientific method. The scientific method is the means of, it's very basic structure. Of course, some scientific investigations are much more complex, but they're built upon this basic skeleton of what we refer to as the scientific method. How do we, as scientists, draw conclusions, or I should say investigate some sort of a research question? And we do have observations that we form. You may wonder why there's something going on in the world. I mean, the example that we like to, or I like to use, is that my pug Pearl, she likes to use the backyard to pee and to poop. And I noticed that the grass turns brown. So there's an observation. And so we would then say, we would form an hypothesis, if we're going to be completely grammatically correct. We form an hypothesis in using the scientific method. And the scientific method says that, or I should say what a hypothesis is, it's some sort of an answer, some sort of a guess as what to that answer might be that we can actually test. So we could say that my hypothesis would be that that her urine is turning the grass brown. We then design and perform an experiment. So how do we do this? Well, you have to have an experiment that contains certain parameters to it in order for it to be considered scientifically valid. You have to have what we call an experimental group and a control group. That is, if we're going to run an experiment, we have to have some of those participants that are exposed to some sort of experimental variable, and then those that are not, and I'll use the example in just a bit. We have to have replicates, that is, we have many that we test this on. Independent variable, you have to identify what is being manipulated, what is different. The dependent variable is how we are measuring our results. And then we have to limit what we call extraneous variables. So what does this mean with Pearl and wondering why, or testing if urine makes the grass grow brown or kills the grass? So we have experimental groups, control groups, and replicates. So we would plant many pots of grass, and we would have, just say 100 to make it easy. We would have 100 pots of grass, right? And 50 of those will designate as experimental. So we'll put urine on 50 of those. That's the experimental group. The control group, we're just going to water with plain water. Now, why we have a control group is so we can actually measure the results, compare them to actually see that there was a difference. As far as replicates, I said we would use 100 pots of grass, 50 in each group, because you don't want to just use one of each, because what if you have some sort of a fluke? You want it to be repeatable. So you want many different replicates. The independent variable, what's being changed or manipulated, what you're watering the grass would it be your independent, what you're watering the grass with would be the independent variable. So for instance, you'd be either watering with water or you're watering with urine. And so what is changing there is your urine. So urine is your independent variable. And then your dependent variable, how are you going to measure your results? What's being measured? In this case, we're going to say our dependent variable is going to be the color of the grass, because dead grass would turn yellow or brown. So that's going to be your dependent variable. How are you measuring the results? And extraneous variables are going to be limited in this case. And that is, for instance, if we're going to study this, that urine turns grass yellow or kills grass, you're just going to have 100 of the same type of grass. You're not going to have, 2 pots of tomatoes and 3 pots of corn and 4 pots of pea plants, or you won't even have like 20 pots of this type of grass and 20 pots of another type of grass and 10 pots of this type of grass. You're also going to want to make sure everything else is the same. Like for instance, you're not going to have some pots that are kept in the dark and some that are kept in a greenhouse and some that are kept in the cold and some that are kept in the heat. You're going to want to make everything else exactly the same, except one group gets watered with urine, the other group gets watered with 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 water, so that way you can, if there are differences, you can say without a doubt that is the urine, because that's the only thing different from the experimental and the control. You go ahead and run your experiment. You collect your data. Quantitative data is when you have numbers as a result, like if you would be measuring the grass and it'd be like 2 centimeters or 4 centimeters. Qualitative data is more or less like the color and the smell of the grass, something that it doesn't involve numbers if there's like a color change or a scent change. And then you have your results, you run your experiment, you have your results, you analyze your results, and then you draw conclusions from them and reporting them. That is if you want to publish them, or just if it's a lab report, you turn them into your instructor. All right, so now that that is out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the introduction of this course, and that is, whoa, ecology. There we go. You decided out of all the courses that you could take for your science requirement, for some of you, or this is required for others, that you have this course called ecology. And so what are we studying? Now, like many science terms, they are steeped in Latin and Greek. So logos means the study of. Oikos means house or home. So you're basically studying our home, planet Earth. Good on them for calling it this, ecology. And so we're studying pretty much everything. I know that's overarching. But what we are studying, or what ecology studies, is it studies the relationship amongst living organisms and what we call like biota, and as far as how they interact with each other, and also how they interact with their environment or the non-living components of their environment. And as you can see from all of these beautiful pictures, the life of an ecologist is never boring. It can be so much fun and so exciting and take you to all sorts of exotic locales. It can also be a little dangerous because you have to go where the plants and the animals are. We'll discuss that in a bit. So whether you're studying koalas or insects or in a stream, studying penguins or sea turtles or owls, or let's give plants a shout out, trees, and measuring the heads of squirrels. It looks like it's a little small on my computer. As an ecologist, you are doing all sorts of wickedly cool stuff. So if you choose to make this your career, you are in for a treat. But if you're only choosing to make this a one semester endeavor, you're still in for a treat. We like to have as much fun as possible for this course. So as far as kind of getting a little bit more into how this course is arranged, you have, in any hierarchy of like living things and how life is organized on our planet, you have these levels. Thank you. Yeah, he's the cockatiel. Aries is telling you he's a pretty bird. He'll do that over and over again. That there are different levels of living things, starting with the most basic to the most, I guess, complex. And you, as an ecologist, can study your discipline on any of these given levels. And this is how the course is arranged. Species ecology, population ecology, community ecology, ecosystem ecology, and then conservation ecology. So in a nutshell, what are each of these? So a species is the single organism. So we would say, for instance, using the example like a species ecologist, if they're concerning themselves with a species, eastern painted turtle. There's a nice looking eastern painted turtle. So as a species ecologist, you would study all there is to know about eastern painted turtles. Now, population is in any given geographic area, a collection of that one given species. So, and the geographic area can be whatever you define it to be. So, it's a picture up here. Eastern painted turtles, for instance, in Green Pond, a population ecologist would study that, or they would study eastern painted turtles in the United States, as long as that geographic area is only including that one given species. So as far as what population ecologists do, they work a lot with numbers and abundance, like, well, how many of them are there? How many males versus females are in the population? How many juveniles versus reproductive adults versus geriatrics? A little different than the species ecologist, who would more or less study, well, like how old do individuals get, and what are their physical characteristics, males versus females, and how many eggs do they lay, for instance. That's a species population thing, whereas population ecologists are more into the numbers and how the populations grow. Your community ecologist, now we're expanding the definition here. We're getting higher up in our hierarchy. A community, by definition, is a geographic area where now you're considering all of the different populations and like how they may or may not interact with one another. So using the example again of Green Pond, you would now take into consideration the eastern painted turtles, the snapping turtles, the carp that are in Green Pond, the algae that's in Green Pond, all the water bugs in Green Pond, the frogs, and how they interact with one another, how they depend upon one another or not, like food webs and food chains. What is absent when we talk about community ecology is you're not taking into consideration the non-living portions. That's next. So a community ecologist is going to study the living things only in that geographic area. And like a population ecologist, that geographic area can once again be whatever size is dictated by the ecologist, whatever they are taking into consideration. Now, an ecosystem, now in that geographic area, we're taking into consideration the living component, or I'm sorry, the non-living components of that particular geographic area. So if we're continue on with Green Pond, now, you know, you've got your fish and your turtles and your water bugs and your frogs, but the non-living components of your pond would be the depth of the water, the temperature of the water, the pH, the dissolved oxygen, and how that affects the living things, or how the living things affect the non-living components of their geographic area. Your next level, actually, from a biological point of view, is your what we would call your biosphere. It's biosphere. It's the whole planet. It's all of these ecosystems that are working together, which you would say the conservation ecologist. Conservation ecologist is major role in ecology is setting up conservation management plans for species, whether they're a species that needs to be controlled, an invasive species like spotted lanternflies, or whether it is a situation where the species is on the brink of extinction and needs to be mitigated in some way. And so what they do is they take in all of these different realms when forming conservation management plans, and then they, I should say, they tap into the different hierarchies or the different experts at these different levels, and they work together to form a conservation management plan. Sorry, that came out a little bit garbled. Like, for instance, if you're trying to manage the spotted lanternfly or the Burmese python down in Florida, these are both invasive species and their numbers are exploding. They were introduced here, and there's no natural predators, and so they're taking off like wildfire and doing a lot of damage to the environment. And so if you're forming some sort of a management plan to try to bring these numbers down, you would have to know from a species ecologist, somebody who studies spotted lanternflies or Burmese pythons, and you'd want to know, okay, so where do they, how many offspring do they have? When do they reach sexual maturity? How do we tell the males from the females? What do they eat? And your population ecologists are they're going to say, hey, if we don't control the numbers, then this is how many that we'll have in a year or 5 years or 10 years. Your community ecology will assess like what is being done in the community or what the effect of the community is. Like from a food web or food chain point of view, that is one way. Will they outcompete other members of that existing community for a nesting space or for food? And that certainly is the case with the Burmese python, which are just basically, since it has no natural predators, they're basically decimating the community of natural animals that live there. The figure I saw was 90%. They predict in the next few years a 90% loss of native bird species and other mammal and reptile species in the Everglades because of the introduction of the Burmese python, which, go back a bit, Burmese pythons are popular pets, sold in pet stores, the size of a pencil, little bigger than a pencil when they're babies, and not from here, but from Asia. And people thought they were cool to have because they're Burmese pythons, and they'd get a little bigger and you'd have to kind of feed them mice, which got expensive, and they got a little bigger and you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I have to go feed it rabbits. So you'd have to scare up a rabbit or two every month or so. And then they get so big that people are like, well, I don't think I can afford this anymore. I don't have enough money to buy a goat every other month to feed it. So they just let them go. They return them what they think is to the wild, quote end quote, in down south, and they're just eating their way through the entire south, and so those numbers have to be mitigated somehow. The opposite would be, as far as setting up a conservation management plan, this is a little brown bats. And I know bats aren't very popular, never really have been, especially nowadays because of COVID and what is believed to be the one vector of transmission. But bats are extremely, very important. Little brown bats are the ones that are around here. And their numbers in the past 10, 20 years, I'm going to say 10 years in our region has been decimated. Up to 100% of little brown bats have died. And some people say, well, whatever, oh, they get tangled in your hair and they carry rabies, blah, 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 blah. They're gross and they're scary. Actually, they're responsible for keeping down pest populations significantly. And like mosquitoes and other agricultural pests. And so because of the loss of little brown bats, that's a huge, huge disruption that has implications for humans, actually. And so we discovered that a fungus that it was introduced causes what's called white nose syndrome. And so how do we do this? And we were losing almost 100% of our bats in certain regions. So what can ecologists do when forming a management plan? Well, you have to know about the species. You need to know about little brown bats. Again, we know what they eat, but when do they reproduce? Where do they reproduce? How many offspring do they have? And when they hibernate, at what temperature do they hibernate? You also need species ecologists that study fungi as far as the white nose syndrome. It's a fungus. So you need species ecologists to study that too. Your population ecologists are going to be the ones that say, well, this is how many we need that are left to be left in the population for the populations to recover. And then what sort of management plan will we need? Do we have to reintroduce bats so we get enough, like captively raise them and release them so the numbers are up so they can reproduce naturally? As far as a population ecologist, they can also estimate the abundance of bats Community ecologists just mentioned that as far as their effect on the community, and our ecosystem ecologist is going to know, well, they hibernate in caves, and they notice that the what's different about the abiotic conditions of a cave, perhaps, that is causing this to be rampant. Now, there are other types of ecology, of course. There's spatial ecology, that's the study of movements of animals. Temporal, the ecology of time, the timing of events, which we're going to do a lab on, or you have a project on that. Thermal ecology, conservation. I don't know why that's there. That shouldn't be. Okay. And that will kind of interweave with what we talk about, but I don't take them on as topics individual topics per se. Hey, you know what? You chose ecology, and I hope you don't regret that. As the biology students are sitting in their nice air-conditioned labs, working with their equipment, we're outside, man. We're in the field. This is what it's all about, and I hope you get that. I hope that doesn't come as a surprise. We have to go where the plants and the animals are. Now, there's some ecology that can be done on, extrapolating information from, like, if you want to study the behavior of a tiger, and you can't go to Asia to look at one in a zoo. That's kind of not really the way it's done in ecology, but we'll just pass on that. And that is that we'll be outside like all other ecologists, and outside is outside, baby. Now, obviously, we're not going to go out in thunderstorms, but we do have to be prepared for what ecologists, all ecologists have to, that is, weather conditions. You don't want to get hurt. Not all animals, very few animals enjoy being studied or poked at, of course. And we also have to make sure that we are able to do our labs as safely and as comfortably as possible, considering the conditions that we undertake. Now, I will say that and anything can happen out in the field, situations, personal injury, vehicle problems, GPS failure. Third-person assault is really rare. I'm not trying to scare you, but it has been known to happen as far as, some creeps out there who are out looking for trouble and you just happen to be in the way. But we'll just move on from that. But now for this class, I will say, that's kind of scary, all that other, that previous slide. Now for us, we're always going to be in, always going to be together. There'll always be cell phone service. We're going to be near campus, if not on campus. I'll have a first aid kit. I'm CPR and first aid certified. We'll ask, obviously, that you're not supposed to wander off. If there's something that you're personally not comfortable doing, then I'm not going to force you to do it. Like, we go into the pond, we go into the stream, and if that really freaks you out, there are other things you could do for the lab experience. Like, you could be a record keeper during the lab experience. But if, like, everything about being outside really wigs you out and freaks you out, you might, drop ad period is like, what, a week long? You might want to consider signing up for a biology class, because we can't substitute all of our labs for something that can be done inside, or writing a paper instead of going into the stream, or going to the stream, or tagging turtles, or going into the marsh. Now, for the experiences themselves, just be sure that you are prepared to be outside for an hour or so. If you have to go to work afterwards, you might want to bring just changes of clothes. Get kind of stinky, or might get your feet wet. Be aware that even if it isn't raining outside, sometimes where we go, like, the grass might be wet because it's in the morning, the dew on the grass. Snacks, water, please an EpiPen if you're allergic to bees or what have you. Bug repellent's important. I would definitely bring that. Yeah, bring a phone if you have it. You definitely need a field notebook, which that's going to be our first week together. We'll talk about that. But as mentioned, I think in an email that I sent you, don't run down to, I'm sure they would love it. It's a cool place, that Easton Outdoor Shop or whatever, and buy all the specialized clothing and equipment for the course. You don't need it. Um, you'll look cool, sure, but I will provide anything that's really specialized. We're a little bit limited, um, but yeah, don't spend money. If you have old clothes, you're good as far as that is concerned. Just a little bit of other safety in the field. We say, well, don't go alone. Bring a field buddy. This is not really for this course. This is for overall if you're ever out. If you want to just kind of go hiking and look for things on your own after getting so excited about what we do in the field that you want to kind of try it with a friend. Just in general, because I was in a situation of survival for a few days. I was out lost during a snowstorm. And so I always just like to just do this little PSA for everybody. Don't make the same mistakes that I made. So don't go alone, we say. Know your area beforehand. Know if there are any dangers, know if there are trails or paths, any obstacles. Make sure you have cell phone service. If you don't, consider getting some sort of an upgrade, like a satellite phone. Now that would be pretty remote. Tell somebody where you're going and when you'll return. And if you're really out in the off the beaten path, definitely bring a survival kit. It doesn't have to be massive, but just, you can read the list there, always something good. Now, you don't need this for class. This is just this public service announcement if you are of the tendency to go through the woods. Defensive gear, mace, for all the creeps that you may encounter. And it's not going to really count here because we're not doing vans this year, but for you, make sure your car is in working order. All right, well, I hope I've gotten you all excited about ecology. I know I am. Being out doing this stuff by myself is not as much fun as doing it with you all. So, all right, I hope to see you soon. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the discussion section of the week's folder. All right, guys, take care. Bye.